James Lightfoot who's doing the meeting recording this morning.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Planning and Highways Committee meeting. Before we move to formal business, for the benefit of those joining us online, I am Councillor Sandra Pickin and I am the Chair of the Planning and Highways Committee. I'm also joined today's meeting by the Deputy Chair, Councillor Stuart Etchinstall. Also, Councillors Blezard, Ellis, Harvey, Epworth, Jones, Saunders, Scott, Swift, Tennant King, Wallace and Williams. The committee also has support at today's meeting from Alex Spur, our planning solicitor.
Sorry, Sandra, I'm here. I'm sorry I joined late, Angela Taylor.
Okay, Councillor Taylor has joined us as well. For the Planning Highways section, we will have an introduction for the application before us today will be Michael Egglestone, and he is a Principal Planning Officer. Before we move on to the formal agenda items, I'd just like to confirm today's meeting procedure. We will take each item on the agenda in order, copies of which have been provided to members is also available on the Council webpage. I would remind colleagues alongside those registered speakers who are participating in today's meeting to ensure that your microphone is on mute throughout the meeting unless invited to speak, to minimise the potential of background noise disrupting the meeting. And also videos can go off until the time when you are either presenting or we go to the vote. In accordance with council meeting procedures rules, my ruling as chair during the debate will be final. When invited to speak, members of the committee and participating members of the public, you will need to unmute your microphones and video and state your name before addressing the committee. Please remute your microphone once you have finished speaking. I will invite any colleague wishing to comment on the reports or ask questions to do so at the appropriate points in the meeting, and all members should now be familiar with the procedures in place to indicate they wish to ask a question or comment on matters before us. At the end of the debate on the planning applications, I will call for a vote to be undertaken. In order for all parties to be clear as to how the vote has gone, I will invite the committee officer to undertake a roll call. The committee officer will ask each member by name to confirm their vote. This will be achieved by members turning on their microphones individually and stating clearly for, against, or abstain. The committee officer will summarise the result at the end of the roll call. If everyone is happy, then I shall proceed with the formal business. Agenda item 1 is Chair's announcements, and I will remind everyone that the meetings of the Planning and Highways Committee are not public meetings. However, they are council meetings held in public, and only those registered to speak will be allowed to do so at the allotted time. During the course of the meeting, it may be necessary to adjourn for a short period, and if this is needed, then I will indicate this clearly to the committee, and if required, request that we pause the broadcast during the adjournment. As we have no urgent items before us today, I will move on to item 3. Do any members have any interest to verbally declare in the matters before us?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Jackie Williams, Ward 15. The application is adjacent to my ward, and I have attended factual meetings with the officer concerned. I've not discussed the matter with anybody or have any predetermination.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yes, Chair. The application is in my ward, and I have also attended the factual briefings alongside Councillor Williams, but I also haven't discussed it with anyone.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4 is to receive apologies for absence.
I have no apologies, Chair.
I have one, which is Councillor Whitehouse, who is unable to attend today. Agenda item 5 is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Move them, Chair.
Second them, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, I have a concern. I do have a concern over the accuracy of the reasons for refusal over the Castleford car wash application.
Yes,
I think
Councillor
it was
Swift.
actually, I think it was actually my wording that was used. And although I was expecting a bit more discussion to ensue, it was actually, I think, my wording that got approved. Now, the wording as it appears has been expanded a bit on what I said. And to be honest, expanded in ways that I think will restrict the ability of the committee when we come to actually deal with finalising it. But the wording I actually used.
Kevin, can I just say that we will be taking that to the next committee and we'll be discussing it at the end of this meeting.
Right. So any inaccuracy in the minute for the last meeting won't prejudice our discussion next time. That's fine. Thanks, Chair.
No. Thank you.
Can I just say there,
And I'll take
Chair, sorry to interrupt, but the reasons for refusal there will be clarified by the members when the item is next brought to committee. I think that would summarise the position.
Yes, that's it, Alex. Can I ask that that is carried, and I will take your silence as a yes. Thank you. Agenda item 6 is to consider the planning application brought with us today, and I will outline the procedure as follows. Firstly, the planning officer will be invited to present the application. Then registered speakers will then be invited to speak one at a time, and I would be grateful if speakers, if they confirm for the benefit of the committee, if they are speaking against or for the application. Members of the committee will be invited to ask registered speakers questions if they need to clarify any points raised. Any local ward member who has registered to speak on the application will be invited to do so. The committee will then be invited to ask the local member any questions if they need to clarify any points raised. Should the need arise, I will seek any points of clarification from the presenting officer or legal advisor. The committee will then be invited to debate the application, and as necessary, I will invite the planning officer to respond to any points raised during the discussion. The matter will then be taken to the vote. I will then now ask Michael Eaglestone, who is the planning officer, to undertake the first presentation. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen to show the presentation. 1 moment, please. So please could someone confirm that you can see the slides now?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So this agenda item is a full planning application accompanied by an environmental statement. So it has to be assessed under the environmental impact assessment regulations for a sand and gravel extraction site on land west of Birkwood Farm, adjacent to Stanley Ferry in Stanley. So you can see the site before you, on the slide before you. It's split into 2 separate fields, both in agricultural use, either side of the River Calder. You can see the River Calder meandering generally north-south on the slide. And there's the extraction area to the south and east of the River Calder is called by the applicant Birkwood, named after the host farms. And the one to the north and west is named by the applicant Smalley Bight. Both sites have separate access points. The Birkwood extraction area has a agricultural access onto Ferry Lane just after the river bridge. The Smalley Bight extraction area has an access point that's both used as an agricultural access and for the access for several residential properties onto Arthur Road, and I've indicated those with my cursor. If at any point anyone has any difficulty seeing or hearing me, then please just let me know. So the purpose of this presentation is not to supplement, not to adjust the report, other than where I've indicated there are a couple of updates on the report. It is simply to take members of the committee through the site and the main points of the assessment. So I'll firstly take you through the site with reference to a number of photographs. Then I'll show the plans of the proposed development, and then I'll just run through the main issues which are assessed in detail in the technical report, which is before everyone. And then obviously I'm here to take any questions at the appropriate time as indicated by the chair. So thank you. So the first photograph before you, it shows the access to the Smalley Bight extraction area, which I've just described. So it's an agricultural access running off Ferry Lane just after the river bridge. It would be improved as part of the proposal in terms of grading and hard surfacing. As I'll explain later in the presentation, it would just be used as a worked access for the 6 employees and also to get plant on and off at the end of the extraction period. And also for any servicing vehicles, such as bringing fuel or maintaining equipment at the site. So the second photograph shows the Smalley Bight extraction area, which, as I've described, is a field in arable land use. The third photograph shows the kind of cross-sectional view between Ferry Lane and the Smalley Bight extraction area. As you can say, well, you may be able to see from the photograph, there's a drop of several metres between the two. The fourth photograph shows the view across to the Smalley Bight extraction area, across the River Calder apologies. The photograph 3 shows the Birkwood extraction area, not the Smalley Bight extraction area. Apologies for that. So the photograph 4 equally shows a view across to the Birkwood extraction area from the Smalley Bight extraction area. So yeah, apologies for this, but on the slides, the Birkwood extraction area and the Smalley Bight extraction area are mixed up. So please, the way it says Birkwood, it should read Smalley Bight. Anyway, I'll describe it as it is. So the photograph 5 is the access for the Smalley Bight extraction area onto Aberford Road, and the photograph 6 shows the access track for the Smalley Bight extraction area, and looking back towards the access onto Aberford Road. The photograph 7 is a view across the arable field, which is the Smalley Bight extraction area, looking northeast towards the location where our sewage works is. It's obviously well screened by a bank of existing trees. Photograph 8 is another view across the Smalley Bight extraction area, looking towards the River Calder, with the Aaron Calder navigation in the background. Photograph 9 is the existing flood defence levee next to the River Calder, which protects the Smalley Bight extraction area, which is currently agricultural fields. These flood defence bunds are built to 1 in 30-year flood defence standard. And photograph 10 shows the strip of land between the flood defence levee and the River Calder, which is used for fishing. The photograph 11 just shows a view down the Smalley Bight access track towards Smalley Bight Farm, which also doubles up as the route of footpath Stanley 12. Apologies again, it says Stanley 10 on the slide. And the 12th photograph is just a view up footpath Stanley 12, looking north towards the sewage works. It runs to the west of the sewage works, the footpath. And then these slides just give you a view of certain key corridors adjacent to the site. So the first is the Transpennine Trail, which runs along the old Naga line to the south of the site. It's not physically connected with the site. And the photograph 14 shows the Aaron Calder navigation and the towpath. The towpath is on the opposite bank of the canal from the proposal site. The bank which adjoins the proposal site as a private track for potential use as private moorings, although there didn't appear to be any boats moored at the time of any of the site visits which were undertaken. So that's just a view of the site with reference relevant photographs. I can go back to any of those photographs at any point. This is just the location plan that was submitted. As you can see, the two extraction areas are outlined in red, and also the access points are comprised within the proposal site, and a small area of the air and colder navigation upon which it would be proposed to construct a new wharf. As I'll explain in more detail later on, the proposal is entirely reliant on extracting sand and gravel and sending it out on canal barges to processing plants that need Dewsbury. In red also is the proposed site for a conveyor bridge over the River Calder. So this is the working scheme submitted to support the application. So effectively the proposal would be, so the site accommodates a river terrace deposit of sand and gravel. This is acknowledged in the development plan and is safeguarded as a mineral safeguarding area. There are relatively few workable deposits of sand and gravel within West Yorkshire. This is a site which the applicant considers to be viable for extraction. So the scheme that the applicant has proposed is to work the site in 10 phases. As you can see, the extraction areas are roughly similar in size. There'll be 5 phases for each that would take place over an 11-year period. So obviously each phase would be approximately 1 year of working. So the proposal would be to strip overburden, which comprises soil and soil-like material from the site up to a depth of around 3 metres. Beneath that is the river terrace sand and gravel deposit. So the overburden would be stripped and formed into peripheral screening bunds to a height of 3 metres. There would also be an area within the northeastern section of the Birkwood working area that would accommodate the plant that would be necessary to screen and wash and crush the sand and gravel into grades that would be suitable for further processing and use off-site. So the site would be worked using the process of sand and gravel extraction is relatively straightforward and effectively involves removing the overburden and then extracting the sand and gravel using an excavator and a dumper truck. So the material will be worked, transported to the plant compound where it would be screened, washed, and then transported via a conveyor and a chute to the wharf that's proposed to be constructed on the Aire and Calder navigation. So with the access points not being suitable for HGV transportation, this scheme has been entirely designed around transportation of the sand and gravel by barge. The applicant proposes to construct a fleet of barges and to undertake necessary improvements to the navigation and canal network to transport the mineral to Dewsbury, both the Aire and Calder navigation and the Calder and Hebble navigation and canalised sections of the River Calder. They're working in cooperation with the Canal and River Trust, and the relevant improvement works that would be required have been identified and are not considered to be obstacles. Effectively, it would comprise some areas of dredging and some repairs to existing locks. So the wharf that would be formed on the Aire and Calder navigation would effectively be a simple, effectively metal platform that would be formed on the western bank, and the mineral would be transported there, and there'd be sufficient length for 2 barges to moor up, and then a chute would deposit the mineral into potentially 80-ton loads, which would then proceed down the canal network to the processing plant. So the site would be worked in phases. Once a phase had been worked, then the applicant proposes to, in a progressive manner, restore the phase by reprofiling the land, although final restoration wouldn't happen until year 12. Once the Birkwood extraction area has been worked out around year 5 to 6, then the applicant would transfer the plant to the Smalley Bight extraction area, where working would begin on the phases of work in the Smalley Bight extraction area. At that point, it would be necessary to construct a conveyor bridge over the River Calder, and the applicants provided some information on what that would comprise, which is effectively a gantry bridge with a conveyor on it, with enough freeboard above the river to ensure there wouldn't be any obstruction to the river. So that would mean that mineral could then be extracted from the Smalley Bight extraction area without having to go onto the highway network. So working would then progress on the Smalley Bight extraction area until the site was worked out by the end of year 11, and then there would be a further year where restoration would take place. So I'll just show you the restoration plans for the site. So the proposed, because there would be no proposal to import any material to infill the land, which is common practice for sand and gravel extraction areas. So because the site will be worked below the water table, the applicant's proposal is to allow the land to flood, and it would become 2 lakes. So instead of the agricultural arable fields, you would have 2 lakes either side of the River Calder, which the applicants indicated they may wish to use for recreational angling purposes, although they've also confirmed that after use is not included in the application, so there would need to be a subsequent application for a recreational angling, for a commercial angling use on the site if they wish to use it for that manner. The fallback would be that it would be 2 lakes with effectively no use. The applicant's also proposing a significant level of planting around the periphery of the lakes, combined with wetland habitat creation. They've calculated that the net change in the biodiversity value of the site, as calculated through the DEFRA biodiversity metric tool, would be a 455% net improvement in the ecological biodiversity value of the land as measured via that tool, which is the planning standard tool which is used and has been reviewed by West Yorkshire Ecology, Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and Natural England. So I'll just show you a couple of slides that will give you an indication of the extent of the workings. They will go up to 11 metres below ground level, and there'd be slopes. There wouldn't be quarry faces because that's not the nature of the material, but there would be slopes formed. And this section shows you the proposed western boundary adjacent to footpath Stanley 12. So the applicant proposes to form a new hedge to widen the existing footpath, which from 1.5 to 2 metres to 3 metres, which they've agreed to do a request of rights of way, provide a new hedge, provide a paladin fence, and then provide the perimeter overburden mound. Then this section shows the gradient of the embankment which would be formed down to the workings. Obviously, workings would only take place at surface level for a relatively short period of time, after which they would progress below ground level. This is a series of sections which show the workings relative to the air and Calder navigation. They don't show the extraction area, but they show it in relation to the various mounds which would be formed. This would provide a request to the Canal and River Trust to evidence the visibility of the site from the air and Calder navigation. And this is a section which just shows how the restoration landform would work in terms of the gradients and of the various slopes. And this is a sectional drawing which shows the level of the lake, which, as you can see, would have. Sorry, this isn't that. This is the sectional drawing that shows the river bridge crossing, which was requested which was submitted at the request of the Environment Agency. So this is the conveyor bridge over the River Calder. It's been submitted to demonstrate there would be no interference with the river. So I'll just leave the slide on the submitted working scheme. I can go to any other slides that members wish to. So I'll just quickly run through the main issues that were assessed and have led to the recommendation for approval subject to conditions and a Section 106 agreement. So I've explained the site and the nature of the workings. So as I say, the application is accompanied by an environmental statement. So it's been assessed in accordance with the environmental impact assessment regulations, which effectively means there's a series of specific consultations that are required, and there's a duty on the council to consider all of the environmental information and come to a reasoned conclusion on the significant environmental effects of the development. And the committee report before you provides that information and indicates the assessment that the planning service believe, which is effectively that the environmental effects of the development can be mitigated to an acceptable level through the imposition of relevant conditions. In terms of the land, so that's the environmental impact assessment conclusion must be integrated with the planning conclusion, and also the planning conclusion includes environmental considerations, but also land use planning issues about the allocation of the site, etc. So the site is within the green belt. It's also allocated as a mineral safeguarding area. Mineral safeguarding areas are primarily allocated to safeguard mineral and stop them being sterilised by surface development. They do not infer that working is necessarily acceptable. Although the allocation text for MSA 5, which is what this site is, says that due to the location of minerals, development cannot be met elsewhere, and in this instance, it is in the green belt. So it's an acknowledgement that safeguarding areas in the green belt, and it states the site will contribute towards a regional supply of aggregates and provide an adequate and steady supply of sand and gravel. The proposal conforms to the core strategy. So that's the allocation text for MSA 5. In terms of the belt policy, it's considered that the development is not inappropriate development in the green belt. The National Planning Policy Framework effectively says that minerals development can be appropriate development in the green belt, or rather not inappropriate development in the green belt, providing there's no conflict with the openness of the green belt or the purpose of including land in the green belt. The report before you sets out a reasoned assessment of why it's considered that the application neither substantially interferes with the green belt's openness nor the purpose of including land in the green belt, and that's effectively about the limited amount of infrastructure which is required, the temporary nature of the consent, and the fact it would be restored to a lower profile following the end of the workings. In terms of the National Planning Policy on Minerals, that essentially sets out a series of environmental criteria against which all minerals proposals must be assessed, and also indicates that significant weight should be given to the economic benefits of extracting minerals. Minerals can only be extracted where they're found. Therefore, the same kind of site selection criteria doesn't apply to the same degree to minerals proposals. So in this instance, it's considered there are significant benefits, both economic benefits and sustainability benefits to working minerals in this location, because firstly, there is an acknowledged shortfall in the supply of sand and gravel within West Yorkshire, as assessed through the West Yorkshire Local Aggregates Assessment 2019. So allowing this site to be worked for 1.9 million tonnes of sand and gravel over the period would help to meet that shortfall in a sustainable location that would be close to the target market. The knock-on effects of that may be to help control the prices construction industry has to pay for sand and gravel, and generally be of benefit to the ready supply of sand and gravel. And the sand and gravel, the applicant is assessed to be suitable for both concrete manufacture, potentially asphalt manufacture, and also general constructional uses. So it meets a good specification for sand and gravel aggregate. The additional benefit of working material at this site is considered to be the approach the applicant is is proposing of transporting all mineral by canal barge. This is something else that is promoted both in the West Yorkshire local aggregates assessment and also in relevant regional and local travel planning documents, trying to move increasingly freight and bulk freight onto rail and waterways. So the effect of that would be to obviously omit the necessity for a large volume of HGV traffic to transport mineral on the road network, and instead be transported via a lesser number of barges on the canal and navigation network, which would have both air quality benefits due to the fewer number of trips and the inherent more benign nature of the barge transportation, and also climate change benefits in terms of, again, reducing the amount of fuel required to transport the minerals. So both of those matters are considered to be strong benefits in favour of the development. However, the application must still be considered in terms of its environmental effect, and it must be ensured that the development does not have unacceptable environmental effects on the natural and historic environment and surrounding residents. So that has been assessed in detail, including through consultation with many bodies, including the Environment Agency, our own Environmental Health Service, our highways teams, the health protection, and all of the teams referenced in the report. There's been an extensive process of consultation, and various amendments and further information have been provided to address issues which have been raised. I'll just briefly go through those. As I say, the detailed assessment is set out in the report, and I won't repeat that. So in terms of landscape and visual impact, the site is not a significant feature in local landscapes. It sits relatively low within the river valley, and there's various screening structures around it, such as banks of woodland, the sewage works, intervening urban development. However, the site would have good visibility from quite a wide range of viewpoints. That said, for instance, the adjacent footpaths lane. So this would be partially screened by the screening bunds, but nonetheless there would be visibility into the site from surrounding land. This has been assessed through landscape and visual impact assessment, and also heritage assessment, to ascertain whether the impact would be significant and adverse. And in general, although certain significant impacts are identified, it's considered that the development would not be unacceptably harmful, and that's effectively because it wouldn't spoil a particularly sensitive or protective view. It would be screened by the screening bunds, and the land would be returned to what's considered to be an appropriate and beneficial landform following the cessation of extraction. So it's assessed that the landscape and visual and heritage impacts of the development are acceptable. In terms of the ecological impacts, I've referred to those previously, and this has been assessed in depth with consultation with West Yorkshire Ecology, Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, and Natural England, although Natural England do not have indicated they don't have a strong interest in the site because they don't consider it affects any statutory protected sites. However, the applicant has revised their restoration proposals to a degree, including provision of potential bird hides, which would be of public amenity benefit, and otter halts, and confirmation that otter-proof fencing would not be used on the site. And it's considered that the proposal would neither cause short-term unacceptable impacts to habitats or protected species, and ultimately would be restored to an ecologically beneficial landform with a 455% increase in biodiversity gain, as stated in the report. So again, the ecological impacts of the development are not considered to be unacceptable. There's been specific concern raised about that impact on specific protected sites, such as Stanley Marsh, and that's covered towards the end of the report, and I can reflect on that further if the committee would like me to, but effectively there isn't considered to be a hydrological connectivity between the site and any protected sites. So, for instance, the issue which was raised about the potential detrimental effect on Sonley Marsh, it's not considered that there's any reasonable basis to conclude that that would be a problem. In terms of impact on the highway network, as I've described, the application would rely on canal haulage of mineral, and that would be secured by a planning condition prohibiting any removal of mineral by HGV, and also a planning obligation which would have the same restriction on it as a belt and braces approach. So the impact on the highway network would basically be the 6 workers arriving at the site on a daily basis, and also the more intermittent use of the site by service vehicles, which should presumably be mainly commercial vans and small tankers bringing fuel and servicing plant, and also the heavy plant arriving at the start and end of the extraction phases. So this has been assessed in detail, including through consultation with Highways Development Management, who requested certain improvements to the access points. So for the Birkwood access point onto Ferry Lane, they requested that the first 15 metres were made up, that there was a road safety audit which has been undertaken to prove the access would be safe, and effectively that's got a requirement for regrading the access to ensure there wasn't be an unacceptably steep gradient, cut back the vegetation to cause adequate visibility, and hard surface the access for the first 15 metres. Subject to those works, it's considered that access point would be safe for the proposed level of use. In terms of the Smalley Bight access, this is an existing access which serves Smalley Bight Farm and 3 detached properties. It's considered that access is suitable. However, there is a need for some repair work to the surfacing of this access, and that's also been agreed by the applicant. In terms of impact on rights of way, there was initially some concern raised by our rights of way team and also the Transpennine Trail about the impact of the development, particularly as the access to the Smalley Bight site would be shared by footpath Stanley 12. So these concerns were largely addressed by the applicant, effectively by proposing some improvements to footpath Stanley 12 by widening it, and also by confirming the screening that would be provided in terms of providing a hedge in front of the security fence, which would then have the bund behind it. They've also agreed to provide a sum of money for the maintenance and improvement of the Transpennine Trail, and also an interpretive board on the Transpennine Trail. So, and the reasoning behind that is that effectively anyone who was using the Transpennine Trail and became aware of the workings, because they could see them or hear them, would be able to look at a board which gives them information on the deposit that was being worked, the working methods such as the use of barges, and then the restoration of the site. That's considered to be a beneficial thing, so that there can be some association or understanding of what's going on. So subject to those, the rights of way team indicated that their concerns were addressed. They did initially request whether there could be a short section of bridle way provided on the Birkwood extraction area. However, the applicant indicated that would be unfeasible because of the drop in levels, and that was accepted by rights of way. So overall, it's considered that the application would not have a significant effect on the highway network or the rights of way network. The other matter that was agreed with the rights of way team was warning signage along this part of the access to obviously give people using that access warning that there may be some vehicles associated with the works also using that access. Obviously, currently they share that access with Smalley Bight Farm, so there will be a number of vehicles, including large agricultural vehicles, going along that access. So in terms of the hydrological and hydrogeological impact of the development, this is obviously quite a key consideration with sand and gravel workings, because effectively you're working a deposit of sand and gravel, which will usually contain part of the water table due to the nature of the hydrogeology. So that is indeed the case here. So the workings would basically proceed below the water table and would require dewatering. And on this plan, you can see certain settlement lagoons which would be proposed to be formed. So the dewatering would be managed by the Environment Agency. They would need a permit before they could dewater. And effectively, that would mean that they would be pumping out the excavations, and they'd be settling out that water, using it for the sand and gravel washing plant, and then discharging excess into the River Aire. However, the rate of discharge would be controlled by the relevant permit from the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency initially raised a number of queries and concerns about the impact of the workings, basically in terms of the effect they would have on the floodplain, because both of these sites are within the floodplain currently, and they need to continue to function as part of the floodplain, both during the workings and following restoration, to ensure that there's no increase in flood risks off-site. So the applicant provided certain further information, including proposals to ensure that the screening bunds would not interfere with the floodplain by providing openings within them. So effectively, in a flood event, water would still flood into the workings, and that's a necessary thing to happen. And there'd be openings formed to ensure that these sites were not afforded a greater degree of flood protection than they currently are, effectively. And the applicant also confirmed the water level of the lakes, to basically confirm that following restoration, the lakes would provide significantly greater. Yes, apologies, I don't think seem to have a drawing in that, but it would provide a greater level of floodwater storage capacity than the existing condition of the agricultural land. That in the end, so essentially it's considered subject to there'd also be. So the other issue with dewatering is it can draw in contamination from surrounding land, because effectively, if you're lowering the water table, you can draw in groundwater and change groundwater flows. So if there's any contaminants surrounding land, then it can draw those in. So that risk has also been acknowledged. The applicant proposes to mitigate that by having a regime of water quality and level monitoring on the site. So effectively, the 6 boreholes have been drilled around the site already, and they would be monitored, and that would be confirmed through a scheme submitted by a planning condition at regular intervals. And if there was any detected significant levels of contamination, there would be required to be an action plan that would address that. And also, they'd have to have a look at the dewatering and the potential source of any contamination drawn into the site. So, subject to the controls set out in the planning conditions at the end of the report, it's considered that there's no reasonable basis to conclude that the site would present unacceptable hydrological or hydrogeological impacts. So one of the main causes of concern for objectors was the noise and air quality impacts of the development. So these are dealt with in detail in the report, and effectively the applicant proposes to address these matters by having so they've done a dust risk assessment, and there will be a dust control scheme. The applicant suggested that sand and gravel working is not a type of minerals extraction that is particularly prone to dust production, partly because the workings are generally in quite a damp condition. Nonetheless, there will be a risk, particularly from mounds and access tracks. So the applicant has proposed various provisions, which would include suspension of working in dry and windy conditions, and also damping down of any roots and piles of material that may become dry and dusty, and for that dust to become airborne. Subject to the implementation and further detail on that by planning condition, it's considered no significant risk of the workings causing unacceptable dust impacts. In terms of noise, that's one of the key potential impacts of the development. And as you can see, there are various residential properties which I'm indicating with my mouse here, that are relatively close to the workings. So there's a specific set of noise guidance included within planning practice guidance that relates to minerals workings, and that guidance essentially states that you should try to achieve a increase in background levels of not more than 10 decibels where possible, where that's not possible without causing untenable impacts on the working of the extraction, then potentially up to 55 decibels can be tolerated. This has been, so the applicant submitted a noise survey which assesses these noise levels and looks at the extraction areas and also any noise from the plant compound. So that effectively assesses that that generally the workings would be within the 10 decibel area. Obviously, workings would be progressive, so the amount of time that they were in proximity to any individual receptor would be relatively limited, and also they would progress below ground level for quite a lot of the time, which would significantly reduce noise. However, there would be a time where there would be increased impact above marginally above the 55 decibel level, and that would be as experienced at the property at Stanley Ferry at Calder House and the property to the northwest. So for the northwestern property, that would be where the workings came within 85 metres of where the workings came to 85 metres of the property, which is roughly where you can see my cursor here. So obviously there would only be a limited amount of time that the workings would be in that. It would be substantially less than a year. And for the property at Stanley Ferry, again, it would be when workings came within 100 metres of that property. So again, that's roughly indicated with my cursor. And again, there would only be a limited amount of time when workings would come within that proximity. Environmental Health have reviewed it and asked for further information on noise impacts and dust impacts, and were satisfied with what the applicant submitted. However, they did ask for reduced hours of operation, which the applicant has agreed with. So the applicant agreed to essentially reduce the morning working hours during the weekday by an hour to 8 o'clock, which also brings it a much more social start time, and also reduce the extent of the weekend working hours to the times shown in the report, which are 8:30 to 1 o'clock on Saturdays. The background noise levels are significantly lower on Saturdays, so it'd be Saturday mornings where any disturbance would be likely to be most pronounced. So subject to the conditions recommended in this report, Environmental Health have recommended that the workings would not cause unacceptable harm, and that's it's considered to be the case. There will be inevitably some residual environmental impacts and some level of disturbance associated with quarry workings. However, with recourse to the relevant guidance and planning policies, it's considered that those are within tolerance, and that the benefits of the development would outweigh the residual environmental impacts given the restrictions proposed, and in particular the quite restricted working hours that are proposed. So that covers the main areas that are assessed in detail in the report. Apologies, that was quite a long presentation. I can cover any matters in detail that you wish to come back to, also via the chair. But in conclusion, it's considered that the benefits of the development in terms of providing much needed sand and gravel into the West Yorkshire construction market, the innovative and use of the waterway to avoid HGV haulage of development would outweigh the harm that the development would cause, and therefore approval is recommended. There's a section of the report at the end that deals specifically with the representations which have been made. There have been 3 additional representations which have been made yesterday and today, but they cover substantially the same issues. And essentially, it's as I've just, so the issues raised are essentially the matters that I've just discussed and are covered in the report, which are ecological impact, risk of flooding, and then the potential risk of disturbance to the local community, in particular by noise and dust impact. I can go over those matters in more detail, but the section at the end of the report summarises the reasons why, notwithstanding the acknowledged concerns of members of the local community, consider that the environmental effects of the development are acceptable and do meet the relevant policy criteria. There was also the various members of the local community also raised the issue of cumulative impact, and in particular a fatigue of the local community for the impacts of development, considering the impacts of the Welbeck landfill site, the City Fields development, the new coal development, prospective development of HS2, etc. In response to that, we did ask the applicant to consider cumulative impacts more explicitly, and they did that in the further environmental information they provided. And in summary, we agreed with the applicant's conclusion that there would not be significant cumulative effects, because essentially the quarry extraction would not combine with the effects of the other developments to cause more significant effects in terms of traffic, visual impacts, or other environmental impacts. And obviously the fact that there would not be additional mineral haulage traffic from the development is a key factor in that. Okay, thank you then. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll hand back to the chair. I'll leave this slide on if that's helpful, or equally I can take it off if that's what's wanted. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We have 3 speakers registered today, but unfortunately the first one cannot attend through with a commitment. So James is going to read this out to you, but can I just be mindful that our fire alarm might go off at 11 o'clock. So over to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is going to be read out by a local resident, Mrs. Orty. Further to my previous objection to the proposed scheme, I would like to raise other concerns. Sorry not to be appearing by Zoom, but unfortunately I have a medical phone call at this time. Recently, due to the vast amount of rain, this has caused problems on the River Calder. Vast amounts of timber debris have been washed up onto the riverbanks, and the land in question on the Stanley Ferry side had standing water on. In 1984, Stanley Nature Reserve was opened, now a very popular area, a tranquil rest area attracting many birds and other consideration. As you are aware, at the side of the Naga lines, the Pennine Trail are the playing fields. During lockdown, it has been wonderful to watch the amount of young children, people, parents participating on the sports field, etc. So this proposal surely will not be in their best interests. Years ago, waterways had many huge vessels, bucket dredgers, pontoons, carrying coal up and down the canal. Now, due to the demise of our coal industry, this operation has now ceased. It's lovely to see narrowboats and pleasure craft moored at the side of a canal. Last weekend, I saw at least 100 boats, and I don't envisage that this will continue with the quarry in the background or nearby. Taking other objections into consideration, I feel that the application will have adverse effects on the environment, climate change, flooding, etc., and the mental health of nearby residents. So taking all points of view, I hope and pray that this application will be refused. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. We're just going to hold fire for 1 minute, please, because if not, this alarm's going to go off just before I get the next speaker. I think we're going to go for it, because hopefully if I turn my mic off, you'll not be able to hear it. So our next speaker is Mr. Chris Bellham.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're just going to say you've got 3 minutes, Mr. Bellum, and I'll remind you when you get down to 30 seconds. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. My name is Chris Ballum. I'm the agent for the applicant. West Yorkshire is very short of sand and gravel resources, and the council is committed to try to meet demand by releasing resources. Currently, most sand and gravel has to be brought in by road from outside the county, and if permission is granted, this site will be the only sand and gravel quarry operating in West Yorkshire. I also need to point out that mineral products like sand and gravel are essential in providing the infrastructure needed by society, such as houses and roads. Economically valuable minerals only exist where they are found. They are not widespread, and there are few sites where extraction would be either viable or environmentally acceptable. This site is also allocated for sand and gravel extraction in the Wakefield local plan, signifying a presumption in favour, providing the environmental standards are met. All mineral from this site will go out by canal and not by road. Each barge can carry up to 300 tonnes if going east towards Leeds, or 80 tonnes if going west to Dewsbury. So each eastbound barge will replace up to 32 lorry movements, and each westbound barge will replace 8 lorry movements. It will be difficult to find other sites with canal access, so any alternative quarry site would generate. Using the canal makes a huge difference to the carbon footprint of producing the sand and gravel, as well as being more environmentally friendly. The quarry will safeguard around 20 direct and indirect jobs, which will be lost if permission is not granted. These are 2 intensively farmed fields with virtually zero ecological interest. The minimal damage to the natural environment is reflected in the biodiversity matrix score of plus 455%. I understand that is very large. Apart from a few bushes on the canal side, no trees or shrubs will be lost. The quarry has been designed to operate with minimal environmental impacts like noise and dust. The excavation will be damp with plenty of water to damp down if required. Most of the time, there will be a single excavator operating, feeding 2 dump trucks. As soon as extraction starts, it will create additional floodplain storage capacity, and once restoration is complete, this additional floodplain storage will become permanent. When completed, restoration will be to a mix of fishing and nature conservation. The 2 lakes will be landscaped, the development of wetland vegetation encouraged, and conservation ponds established with artificial otter holes and bird hides, a marked contrast with the land as it currently is, 2 intensively farmed arable fields. If I could summarise, it will be that it will be difficult to find a location which is closer to the users of mineral products that could be quarried with so little environmental impact and which will create such a significant level of environmental enhancement when complete. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Ballum? Councillor Harvey?
Thank you, Chair. Just one very short question. Just want to know, will the movement of this large mass of land cause any instability issues on the land?
We've had a stability assessment done by civil engineers because we don't want to end up with a St Aidan's situation. I don't know if you remember the coal mine there that flooded, and the whole excavation has been designed to protect surrounding land. So there should be no instability caused beyond the site boundary, and that's been confirmed by the civil engineers.
Thank you.
Councillor
Question there, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Did you say your name was Mr. Barron? Yeah, is it? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it was Chris Ballum.
Ballum, sorry about that. Good morning, Chris. Could I ask, what action plan is there in case of a flooding? And also, if there was a problem on the site with the conveyor, where would the spoils be stored till you got it fixed, or would this cause too much problem for the people on the site?
Right. If there's going to be a flood, it would have to be allowed onto the site, and the excavation would fill it with water. And then when the river levels dropped, that water would have to be pumped out and back into the river. So the chances of that happening are relatively slight, because these two fields have not been known to flood to any appreciable extent. The conveyor bridge will have if you like, a mat underneath it that would catch anything that fell off the conveyor, and that would have to be kept clean. I think the Environment Agency will take a very dim view if we start dropping sand and gravel into the river. So that there'd have to be a guarantee that that would not happen, and the conveyor bridge will be constructed to make sure that that did not happen.
Can I come back on that, Chair? Thank you. With all the goodwill in the world, Chris, that mechanical things do come to a halt sometime along the line, and the conveyor belt probably, hopefully not, but if it did, the mechanisms of the conveyor belt will come to a halt. So have you got contingency plans of what to do if that happens with the spoils that you've already excavated from the quarry?
Yes, there would have to be a what we call a surge pile, that you take the sand and gravel out of the ground and you put it into a stockpile, and then you load out from the stockpile onto the conveyor. So if the conveyor stops, you wouldn't be able to load any more material off the stockpile, and you'd have to repair the conveyor and then resume operations. But there'd be no spillage, and the main operation could continue as long as you had capacity in the stockpile. If the stockpile got too big, you'd have to stop excavation for a period.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chris.
Okay. Councillor Swift.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got two questions. The first one is about the River Calder. Now, the section of the River Calder that goes through this site, it's prone to erosion of the banks. Indeed, there's a reference to that erosion in the officer report, but I do know from previous times that there is quite often significant erosion to the banks of the River Calder. So I suppose following from that, if there is further erosion, which over a 12-year period, it would be surprising if there wasn't. If there was further erosion, what are the implications of that, both to the kind of protective features at the edge of this site, the bunding and so forth, and also to the footpath along the side of the River Calder. Again, there's references in the officer report to difficulties over that footpath. When the whole job's finished and restored, will the footpath along the side of the River Calder be restored in full? My second question was simply as to whether there are arrangements with the Environment Agency for abstraction from the River Calder if in the case of protracted dry weather, which in these days of climate change we do experience, if in the case of protracted dry weather, to ensure that there was actually sufficient water on site to contain the dust. In other words, at precisely the time when the risk from the dust is greatest, the chances are that the amount of water in the lagoons is most at risk of running out. So it's those two separate questions, Chair.
Right. There has been a problem with erosion of the bank near Smalley Bite Farm outside the boundary of the planning application, and that has cut the footpath. I am not aware of any proposals to try and reinstate the footpath. That's the only erosion in the vicinity of this site that I am aware of. Again, if I go back to my answer to a previous question, the civil engineers that looked at stability also looked at stability relative to both the canal and the river, and they recommended a minimum 20-metre standoff. In a lot of places, we've got much more than that because of the levee banks. So the top of the bank of the excavation is set well away from the river. I would be surprised if things got so bad that the river eroded into the site. You can never rule that out because it's a natural process. But it shouldn't be a problem. Anything like that could be repaired, and the breach repaired and put back so that it will be back to what it was before. There will never be a need to extract water from the river for use on the site. It will be continual as the excavation goes down 7 or 8 meters below groundwater levels. So there will always be groundwater coming into the site. It will never, ever dry. So there will never be a question of extracting water from the river. We'll be putting it into the river continually from the discharge, and we'll need a permit from the Environment Agency to cover both abstraction from the working itself and the discharge into the river. What was the last point? Sorry, I've forgotten.
I think you have actually covered both points. Thank you.
Right, okay, thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thanks, Chair. I have to say that I am obviously very impressed with the fact that the extraction is to be transported by barge. So clearly there is, this application can only go ahead if the sand and gravel is removed by barge. So yeah, I have sort of tracked the route through to Dewsbury. So is the site prepared in Dewsbury for unloading the barges? Obviously, it may well be this is not material to this application, but obviously I'm just curious because clearly the Ravensthorpe end has got to be as prepared as our end has got to be in order to make the whole thing work. Thanks, Chair.
There isn't a wharfage there at the moment. There used to be, because the applicant's site, which is a concrete block plant, a concrete batching plant and an asphalt plant, used to be a colliery, and it had its own wharfage on the canal. We will have to build a new wharfage there, much the same way that we would have to build a wharfage on the Stanley Ferry site. And so that shouldn't take too long, although it would require planning permission from Kirklees Council to do that. There are wharfage facilities to the east in Leeds, which could more or less be used straight away. So that facility is there.
Right. So obviously this is part of a complete package, then, isn't it, Chris? In order to make this whole project work.
Yes, you have to have somewhere for the barges to go to. So that has to be dealt with as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Harvey, you wanted to come back in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It is an 11 years project. So is there any kind of guarantee that the project will be taken to completion? Thank you.
Well, there's a lot of money to be spent to get it up and running. There's the wharfage to build, the barges to build, which we're hoping will be electrically powered, the conveyor bridge. So there's a lot of investment that has to go into this site, and it has to be paid for. So the incentive is there to get through to the end of the scheme and take all the mineral out and restore it. There is provision in the conditions that you have before you that if working does cease for any reason, then the operator would have to submit a revised restoration scheme, and that would be the end product. And you're only disturbing the land a year's worth at a time. So if you stopped at the end of year 5, the excavation would only be the first 5 pages. The rest of the land wouldn't have been touched. So it would be possible to cope with events if it stopped early, but that would be quite unusual in my long experience, because there's a very large demand for the sand and gravel, and this would be the only operating sand and gravel quarry in the whole of West Yorkshire.
Thank you.
Councillor Epworth.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, there's a residential property that sits on the edge of the river as you come across from Birkwood Road to Ferry Lane. It has had to have in the last few years a protective shell built around it to protect it from erosion, and additionally it sits on a sandbank, which falls in line with development of the first part of your plan. Is there any provisions to protect that property and the residents there, as imagine any drilling along the sandbank going towards the away from his property would impact his property going forward?
Our civil engineers looked at that specifically because we had that point was raised at an early stage. The sand and gravel itself doesn't offer very much support to the land around it. So providing you're at an adequate distance, which we are back again to the set distance that the civil engineers said we had to keep to, then there will be no problem beyond the site boundary. Before that house falls in, the road and bridges had fallen. So it's most unlikely to happen. In fact, I would say it will not happen.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Blazard, do you want to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. Chris, could you tell me about the consultation, what you've had with these residents? And that's my first question. And then my second question is, your construction traffic, what route would that take to come into this site? Thank you.
Sorry, I missed the first point. I'll answer the second point, and then if you could repeat the first one again. The construction traffic, there isn't very much, because the amount of heavy plant is limited. You would need a couple of low loaders to bring in the excavators and dump trucks, and they would only be on the Smalley Bite side, on the Stanley side. That's all that you would need, plus you might need one or two to bring in parts of the conveyor bridge. So that would be at the beginning of that 5-year period and at the end of it. And then if you needed any replacement heavy plant, you'd obviously have to take it out and bring it back in again. I don't know which way they will come through Stanley, but that's an A road, a major road up towards the motorway. And I would imagine that they will probably come in from the motorway, but you're talking about, you know, 3 or 4 vehicles at beginning of 5 years and another 3 or 4 at the end of the 5 years. On the other side of the river, the ferry lane, you'd have the same plant being brought in, plus the washing plant and the crushers and screens. So there might be another 3 low loaders with those. So you might have 6 at the beginning, and then the mobile plant will come off, and then at the end of the 11 years, the fixed plant, the washer and so on, that would have to come off. There's a problem with the river bridge at the moment, so the only way that's going to get into the site, it would have to come in from the Altofts end, but we're talking about 5 vehicles coming in. That's it really.
Just to clarify that, Chris, then, the bridge that leads from Stanley Ferry into Altofts, that's only a 1-car passage. You know, you have to wait at each end for 1 car to go over, which is traffic lighted. I don't think, and I'm not an expert obviously, but in my opinion, the heavy weight of them trucks, what you've just said, would that bridge be able to withstand that?
The low loaders are designed to spread load. They put no more load down than a normal HGV. They might be heavier, but there's more axles and more wheels. So the actual loading on each wheel is possibly less than a normal HGV. So there wouldn't be a problem with that. They're traffic light controlled, and if necessary, to control traffic movements whilst the vehicles manoeuvred in and out of the site. And that would only happen over I don't know, a 15-minute period, something like that. So I wouldn't have thought it was a particular problem.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And the first question I asked was when Councillor Hepworth asked about the house. In our paperwork, we've got quite a few things saying that they want enough consultation. Could you tell me about how you consulted with these people and what consultations you've done, please?
Yes, well, the pandemic has caused a problem. Normally, I would arrange public displays, leafleting, and have that over an extended period of time. But we were not able to do that. So what we did, we set up a website and we posted all the information we had onto that website, and then we leafleted. I can't remember how many leaflets we put out in the locality, but it was several thousand. We also set up I'm not a user of social media, so you have to forgive me. We set up Facebook and Twitter feeds, and I didn't do that, but we had communications people to do that. And then I wrote to Normanton Parish Council and asked them if they wanted to engage with us. We never had any feedback from that. I also wrote to the 6 ward councillors offering to give information, and that was a limit of what we were able to do. I was contacted last week, I think it was last week, by somebody about a leaf that had been delivered with the wrong website address on it, and complaining that how could I expect people to understand if I couldn't even provide a website address that worked. It wasn't my leaflet. I have no idea who produced it. So, but the community itself has done quite a bit of dissemination of information. I think we probably did the most that we were able to do in the circumstances of the pandemic.
Chair, can I just come back on that? I wasn't aware that Chris had wrote to the town council I know the town council have made have objected to this in our paperwork, but I'd just like to say that I had no dealings with this at the town council level. I come out when it comes to planning, and that's documented to say that Councillor Blizzard leaves the meeting. So I didn't know that Chris had contacted the town council. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. We have no more questions from members. Then we will go to our next speaker, Councillor Morley. We'll go to our next speaker.
Thank you, Chair. Today I speak as a local member for Stanley and Atwood East, where does this plan application will affect. I'm also speaking on behalf of my ward colleague, Councillor Hemingway, and also our ward colleague in Ward 3, Councillor Spate, as well as the governing body of Stanley Grove School, where I'm a governor at, and also the local community. As we know, Chair, quite a number of objections have come into this plan application from the local community with a range of issues. The environment and the impact on nature, people are really concerned about that. The long-term issues this application is going to have within our community. The fact that it is 11 years, but the people of Stanley and Altofts are going to have to live with this for many, many years to come. It is a beautiful site already, and I don't really see that some of the benefits of two massive lakes at the end of it is actually going to bring. I've seen a similar scheme over at Methley myself, where I don't see it brings anything to the local environment apart from a load of horrible signs and wooden fences saying deep water, keep out, dangered, hazard, and the likes. So the impact on the openness of the green belt, we have got some major concerns in our community of Stanley and obviously Altofts. The dust and the noise that's going to come from this site, we've already heard that they're going to be self-regulated, that if it is quite windy, they will cease. Who's going to regulate that? Who's going to regulate the ceasing production of that? The long-term effects on properties, and we all know that dust can fly for miles. There's some massive settlements on Ferry Lane, and also we've got the city fields just further up from there as well. So local residents are really concerned about that and the noise, the hours of working. I know they say they're going to alternate them so they're not as working long periods on a weekend, but people have to live with that for 11 years. It's a long, long time. I'm also really concerned though, we've talked a lot and people are praising this scheme will use the canal to get it out by barge. What happens when we can't get or we can't use the barges? When issues arise with flooding, we've seen at the weekend, you know, the unprecedented amount of rain, we've seen our river levels raise. If they can't use that, will we come back and have a discharge of them regulations to start using by road? The road network for Stanley and Altus is not set up to get this material out by road. So that's a massive concern to myself as well. Like I say, Chair, at the end of the day, the community's going to have to live with this for many years to come. So I have got some massive concerns, and so has the local community.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any questions to Councillor Morley? Right, Councillor Morley, then that's it. There's no questions for you at the minute. They can't see any anyway.
Chair, if it's okay, can I leave the meeting at this point so you can deliberate without me being here for the rest of the meeting?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much.
Do they have questions to officers?
Chair,
Councillor Swift.
Sorry.
Yes, I think I want to follow up on some of the questions that I was asking the applicant, plus maybe one or two more. The first relates to, it follows on to some degree from what Councillor Morley was saying, but it's the security of the movement by barge. Now, it's made clear both by the officer's report and by what the applicant said that there's work that needs to be done at the Ravensthorpe end. There's also was reference made to work needing to be done in conjunction with the Canal and River Trust on certain locks and some dredging. Now, I think so. My first question really is, how does that work get tied in? You know, there's lots of conditions and requirements and so forth on the application for other things. How do you tie in that work to be satisfactorily done before you know, work starts on the site?
Michael, do you? Michael, you're on mute.
Apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yes, good.
Okay, thank you. So I think so. Councillor Swift's question was about what happened. Effectively, how can we be sure that the works will take place that are known to be required on the navigation network, and what happens if they aren't, and how does that relate to the permission zone? So firstly, that yes, there are clearly some works required to facilitate the transportation of mineral by barge. And that, as Mr. Ballum explained, that involve creating the wharfage at this site, creating the wharfage at the recipient site, unless a site with existing wharfage, such as in Leeds, is used, and also some limited amounts of dredging, as I understand, and some repairs to existing locks. So the scope of works is known, and I understand there has been discussion with the Canal and River Trust. The Canal and River Trust has confirmed their support in principle for the scheme, and also that the relevant waterways are commercial waterways and therefore are suitable for that purpose. I would also say that in the background to this, there's been quite a lot about at a regional level about unlocking the potential of the waterways to move materials. So there is a lot understood about the works that would be necessary. My understanding is in this instance, it's relatively minimal works. They would be tied to permission in the sense of the usually off-site works would be, in that the development could not go ahead without them being undertaken, because there would be an absolute prohibition on moving any material from the site by any means other than the canal network. So there both be a requirement for a scheme to be approved that explained exactly the works that were required, and then there would be a prohibition both through planning condition. You'll see planning condition 5 in the report, and by a separate legal obligation to section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act that would prevent any mineral being taken off site by any other means. And the practical consequence of that is that if for instance, the applicant found that there were more obstructions on the navigation network, there was further work required, and wasn't able to do them for a period of time, or indeed do them at all, then this working simply could not take place. There's, in terms of any proposals to vary the conditions, that would have to be by a formal application, and there's no reason to believe that there's any intention to submit that sort of application. I think it's fairly clear that the access points would not be suitable for HGV transportation of mineral from the site. They're not industrial standard access points. It's very unlikely they could be improved, not least because of the issues with the bridges on Birkwood Road and Ferry Lane, and you know, also just the standard of the access onto Aberford Road. So there's no concern in the planning service that this is in any way an intention to transport material from the site in other than canal. It doesn't appear plausible to us that any proposal to do that would be successful, because there simply doesn't appear to be a suitable standard of infrastructure available. So sorry, I realise that's a little bit waffly, but I hope it answers the question.
You okay with that, Councillor Swift?
Sorry, Chair, just unmuting myself. Yeah, so, okay. Can I move on to the issue of the riverbank? Now, I wasn't 100% happy over the response on the riverbank. I wonder if the officer could actually confirm what the applicant said, which was that that there isn't any. The applicant said there wasn't any section of footpath that was adjoining the site on the riverbank side. Is that the officer view as well? It's because certainly it gets referred to in the report.
Yeah, if I could just go back to the site plan and illustrate this. So yeah, so the relevant footpath along the bank of the River Calder is, I'm indicating with my cursor here. So this is a footpath that goes from Ferry Lane and then goes across here and links in with footpath Stanley 12. Footpath Stanley 12 comes up from the Naga lines and then up in this direction. So this footpath is currently closed because of erosion. The rights of way have confirmed that. That's outside of the application site. The workings do not adjoin that footpath. As you can see, the Birkwood extraction area is on the opposite side of the River Calder. So there seems to be no reasonable basis to require the applicant to do any work to that footpath. It's basically an existing issue with a footpath that runs along the edge of the Calder. There's certainly no footpath beyond this point, which runs parallel with the site, other than footpath Stanley 12, which I described. In terms of the protection of the banks of the River Calder, and Mr. Ballum explained that these 20-metre standoff, and that is something that the Environment Agency have requested, and something that is set out in the planning conditions. So there could be no extraction within 20 metres of the banks. The stability report provided by the applicant does identify the banks. So the engineer looked at the basically assessed the stability of the canal embankment and also other embankments, including the river embankments, and he assessed that they were not all stable. However, this is a riverbank, and that is not uncommon. Rivers change over time, and indeed this meander is evidence of that. I think the issue is whether the workings would affect that, and I don't think with a 20-metre. So the riverbank, which may be unstable in places, is currently set back behind flood defence bunds and the flood defence levee, and then behind that the minerals workings would take place. So for the workings to affect that, they would obviously have to, undermine land to the extent that the banks are affected. The engineer and the Environment Agency are content with that 20-metre standoff would prevent that. And as Mr. Ballum explained, there may be natural changes to the riverbank over time, but there doesn't seem to be any basis to think that this extraction would exacerbate that situation. So that explains.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Blezard.
Thank you, Chair. It's our highways officer. On agenda page 26, it talks about the roadway and things. I'm just querying, it says, however, a stage 1 road safety audit is required in relation to the Ferry Lane access, and this should be submitted to Wakefield HDM prior to determination. Now, could you just explain to me what that stage 1 road safety audit is?
Thank you, Councillor. The safety audit would identify any issues on the highway network, such as sight lines, visibility. It would generally look at speed restrictions and so on. It's a fairly standard thing to ask for, where you might have amendments to an existing access, like we've requested on Ferry Lane. So we want improved surfacing. It would look at vegetation, for example. It covers off things, takes the applicant through a process, if you like. So although we're confident that by planning condition we can make the necessary improvements that we want, the safety audit is undertaken by an independent auditor. A stage 2 would look at the design that is put forward, again in terms of the necessary sight lines, mindful of the bend, the nearby bend. Vehicle speeds, I know from my own assessment, are around 25-26 miles an hour there. It is a 30-mile-an-hour limit. Some highways engineers might not have been inclined to secure an audit, but there's no harm in doing so. And what it does facilitate is, if there are any tweaks that need to be made beyond just the initial submitted drawings, and again, I would probably at this location probably focus on vegetation, any shrubbery and so on. It needs to be actively maintained over the next 10 years, which obviously with a very sporadically used agricultural access at the moment, is clearly not the case, in semi-rural character and so on. So that was the Ferry Lane access that I looked at and decided that would be a reasonable thing to ask for, as opposed to the Aberford Road side of the site, which is it was less of a concern, in fairness, although did identify some quite strange roadside structures that needed removing, blocks and logs and stuff, I think, that had been put there to stop people parking on the corner, and again surfacing really. But ultimately, with such very low vehicular use, and the mobilisation encompasses something like 6 vehicles, the low loaders, 8 or 9 axles, and then your daily employee use, i.e. regular cars, small vans, would be approximately 6 people arriving and 6 people leaving every day. So it may in hindsight have been over-egging it slightly, asking for an RSA, but again, there's just simply no harm in doing that. It can only make things better. So it was something that I assessed this one and just decided to cover off. Councillor, hope that helps.
Thank you, Adrian. Yeah, it does help. I thought that's what it meant, but I just wanted to be, that is exactly what it did mean. But thank you for that report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thanks, Chair. I understand the reasons for this application. I appreciate the detail that has been gone into in this application in terms of trying to alleviate all possible concerns. And I really do appreciate the fact that this is planned to be going out by by barge rather than by road. So really, I suppose it's sort of following on from the other previous questions. Is it quite categorically clear, and also based on the comments that Councillor Morley said in his presentation, is it quite clear that at no time during the lifetime of this extraction will any material be removed by road in order to go to one of these one of the plants over either in Leeds or in Dewsbury? Thanks, Chair.
So just to confirm, that would be regulated by both planning condition and Section 106 obligation, which is to a degree duplication. However, we felt it was best to kind of take a belt and braces approach. So the planning condition is condition 5, and it states as drafted that no sand or gravel or any other materials excavated from the site shall be removed from the site by any other means than via waterway transportation by barge on the air and cold air navigation, utilising a wharf loading point in the location identified on the relevant drawing. In no circumstances shall any sand or gravel nor any other material excavated from the site be removed from the site by road. So that is, I believe, a clearly framed planning condition. There's nothing to me which indicates the applicant has any other intention, as I say, not least because of the suitability of the road infrastructure. If there was a breach of that condition, then we could enforce it. If there was a safety issue, then we could, as we could issue a temporary stop notice and prevent anything happening at the site. Until the HGV movements had ceased. We have the planning enforcement powers available to us to use to investigate and address a breach of planning permission. And I would suggest that if the site did start removing material by HGV, that would be detected very quickly and would be addressed very quickly. The factor would also be included in the Section 106 obligation effectively means that the applicant would also be entering into a legal contract with the council to the same effect that all material would be removed by barge and no material would be removed by road. The only benefit to doing that in addition to the planning condition is the precise wording and scope of it can be framed in a way that potentially a planning condition couldn't, to for instance, cover all eventualities, forestall any proposals to remove by HGV. But I mean, my colleague Adrian may wish to add to this, but to me, I don't think there's any